Sound is.
We've reached new heights today, Nick, because believe it or not, our guest today is pretty important, and in fact was actually on Stephen Colbert's Late Show just last year, as well as a number of shows in the US. What do you reckon about that?
Mate, unbelievable. This guy's a living legend. How good is that?
Absolutely. He is, I mean, we're so proud to say that he is of Greek extraction, aren't we?
We are, mate. He's one of us. What a champion.
I know.
And what he's achieved.
Absolutely. Well, look, let me tell you a little bit about him, because we've only got him for a short time, and we're very proud to be able to have him with us. He's a retired 4-star US naval officer who's currently Vice Chair of Global Affairs and Managing Director of global investment firm, the Carlyle Group. He's also 12th Chair of the Rockefeller Foundation Board. He led the NATO Alliance and global operations from 2009 to 2013 as 16th Supreme Allied Commander, with responsibility for Afghanistan, Libya, the Balkans, Syria, counter-piracy and cybersecurity. He also served as commander of US Southern Command, with responsibility for all military operations in Latin America from 2006 to 2009. He earned more than 50 medals, including 28 from foreign nations in his 37-year military career. Earlier in his military career, he commanded the top ship in the Atlantic Fleet, winning the Battenberg Cup, as well as a squadron of destroyers and a carrier strike group, all in combat. In 2016, he was vetted for vice president by Hillary Clinton and subsequently invited to Trump Tower to discuss a cabinet position in the Trump administration. He holds a PhD in international relations and has published 11 books and thousands of articles in leading journals around the world. His books have sold hundreds of thousands of copies worldwide and have been published in 22 languages, and his 2012 TED Talk on global security has over 1 million views. He's a Bloomberg opinion columnist, a contributing editor for Time magazine, and Chief International Security Analyst for NBC News. And again, among all these achievements, he's also proud to have been sanctioned by the Kremlin on November 11, 2022, in recognition of his enormous contempt for Vladimir Putin's regime. Beaming in live from the USA, Admiral James Stavridis, welcome to Uzor Talk. A pleasure to have you with us, sir.
Well, thank you. What a lovely introduction. I want to add just two things to it. One, quite serious. The first one is just, I'm not the only Admiral Stavridis in the world. The other Admiral Stavridis is Australian. His name is John Stavridis. You may know of him.
We know him.
He commanded one of your absolutely top flight, brand new destroyers. As we say in the Navy, he shipped his star, became an admiral, and I remain in close touch with John. He's a terrific colleague and fellow admiral and fellow Greek. So
well, we can vouch for that because we had him on the show sort of at the end of last year, I think it was, and he was an absolute gentleman, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's a delight. And then the second thing I want to say, just anytime I have a chance to talk to Australians, and I'm sure this would come up normally in our conversation, but I simply, as an American, want to say thank you. Australia has stood with the United States again and again and again in World War I, World War II, in Korea, in Vietnam. We didn't have a lot of allies on the ground there, to say the least. In Desert Storm, and during my 4 years as Supreme Allied Commander, I had the privilege of commanding Australian troops, working closely with your Chief of Defense, Sir David Hurley. I know the quality of Australians and the quality of your troops. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that recognition. It's fantastic to hear that from someone of your caliber, sir. Well, look, on that note, I think we should probably get into the episode properly. What do you think?
I think so. Let's go.
Let's do it.
Let's kick it off.
Yamas.
Cheers.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Admiral. And to kick us off, maybe could you tell us a little bit about your Greek credentials, your Greek background?
Yeah, I think they're pretty good. My grandparents came over from what is today Izmir. In those days, it was known as Smyrna. It was a wonderful multi-ethnic city in the Ottoman Empire on the west coast of Turkey. They were citizens of the Ottoman Empire, and when the Turk army destroyed Smyrna in 1912, 1922, Greeks escaped as refugees. My grandmother in particular was in that wave. Fell in love with my grandfather in Athens, and they said, "Phew, had enough of this part of the world." And who knows? Maybe they thought about going to Australia, but luckily for me, they chose to go through Ellis Island in New York City, and so I'm a proud grandson. I'll conclude this by saying, 1922, they ended up coming to America. In 1992, 70 years later, I went back to Turkey, to that very city, back to Izmir.
Wow.
Except I was a commander in the U.S. Navy and captain of a $1 billion U.S. warship.
Wow.
I don't think they could have imagined that as they stood as refugees loaded into Greek fishing boats. Pretty amazing.
That is unbelievable.
So what was that like? How did you feel commanding this ship where your grandparents, got ejected from there?
Yeah, I had, as you can imagine, very mixed emotional feelings. You didn't hear a lot of great things about Turks around our house growing up. And, so here I was, captain of this brand new ship, driving it into Turkish waters. And, the Turkish liaison officer came aboard with his clipboard and saw my name and said, "Oh, Captain Stavridis, you're Greek." And I said, "Well, technically, my grandparents were of Turkish descent. They were from the Ottoman Empire, but yes, they were definitely Greeks in every sense." And so here's a second important point about that story. So I'm a young commander at that point. Later on, I'd become, as you were nice enough to point out, a 4-star admiral, Supreme Allied Commander in NATO. The first capital I visited of the then 28 nations was not Athens. It was not London. It was not Paris or Rome or Berlin or Madrid. The first capital I went to was Ankara. I went to Turkey because I knew how that would all land for the Turks. And we could have a debate about their role in the alliance, but they're members and allies. So I went and established my credentials there with the Turks and the Turkish government. At the time, Erdogan was prime minister. Today, of course, he's president. I worked a lot with Ahmet Davutoglu, who was the foreign minister. And I came to know the Turks and, in all their complexities. Here's my point. When I left 4 years later, concluding my tour as Supreme Allied Commander, Minister Davutoglu, for a farewell gift, did not give me, a pen and pencil set or a clock or something. He gave me a book that was full of vintage postcards from the Greek community in Smyrna from the turn of the last century. As he handed it to me, he said, "Admiral, you have shown us that we can remember our history, but not be imprisoned by it." I thought that was a good line.
Yeah, very touching.
Well, I guess for someone like yourself, there's a fine line between playing the role of diplomat as well as being a military man. What is it like dealing with people from backgrounds that, particularly for yourself, with your background, your Greek and sort of Turkish extraction, what was it like dealing with individuals like that and dealing with the culture?
In many ways, it was a very powerful aspect of working within NATO, because here you have 28 different countries, all with different languages, different cultures, different histories, and to swim in that sea is very helpful to have come out of one of those cultures, in my case the Greek culture. And I also ended up being born in Florida ultimately, long story, but ended up speaking Spanish reasonably well, and I lived in Greece for 3 years when I was a child and attended, back to my Greek credentials, I actually lived in Athens and went to school there. But the best school in those days, in the late 1960s, was actually taught in French. So my French is quite good, my Spanish is serviceable, my Greek is not as good as I wish it was. But at least I could kind of, again, swim in those seas, those cultural seas. And I'll close with this. Before I went to every country to make a courtesy call, Typically, yeah, I would read the intelligence and read what the CIA thought and what NATO intel thought about what was happening in Albania. But I would also read a novel. I'd find a book that really spoke to the culture of that country. And for example, in Albania, since we're talking about it, which has a lot of Greek angles to it, as you probably know, a lot of similarities between the Illyrian culture of the Albanians and the Greeks and the Macedonians. And so I read a novel by Ismail Kaduri, who is an incredible writer. I think he'll probably end up winning a Nobel Prize at some point. And the novel was called Broken April. And it was about Albanian culture and history, very instructive. So my point is, your knowledge not only of the military and the facts on the ground and all the things you have to know to do your job as an admiral or general are important. It's also important to understand the cultural, the historical, the heart of many of these different nations. By the way, on Australian literature, I'm a huge fan of Peter Carey, who has written any number of marvelous novels that have helped me understand the culture of your amazing country, including his true history of the Kelly Gang.
Yeah, right. A very interesting story indeed. But look, I mean, we should probably take advantage of the fact that we've been sort of talking about Turkey. I mean, we've seen Turkey take an increasingly bold stance on the international stage recently, particularly when it comes to Greece, including its documented, overflights over Greek territory and whatnot. I mean, do you think that President Erdogan is posturing for an internal audience, or do you think that the threats are genuine?
I think it is the former, not the latter, meaning he is playing to his base, as we would say in the United States. And let's observe that he's in a tough election campaign. He's got an election coming up in May at the moment. The date is kind of shifting around a little bit, which is concerning in and of itself. And he has serious economic headwinds. I mean, the Turkish economy is in terrible state, largely due to bad decisions he has made. He has also, of course, landed on top of that is this terrible disaster, probably 22,000 dead. Yeah. And the response, at least thus far, is not setting any records. So he's got a tough campaign, and so he is going to attempt to demonstrate that he is a powerful international figure, that he can command respect and attention. I think the overflights over the Aegean Islands, which is something I struggled with as the NATO commander, I think that his posturing toward Russia, working, I think, more closely perhaps than he should with Vladimir Putin, is another example of this. He wants to appear strong. Final thought here, the Turks will, I think, kind of correctly bristle if you say to them, oh, Turkey, it could be such a bridge between East and West. They don't see themselves that way. They don't see themselves as a bridge between East and West. They see themselves as Ottomans, as a unique, distinct culture that once dominated that region from the gates of Vienna to down through Egypt and well toward Iraq, the Ottoman Empire. And so we need to understand that as we look at the psychology and the approach taken by Erdogan. Doesn't mean we can't work with him, doesn't mean Turkey cannot be a competent, capable member of the alliance, but we need to understand it, put it in context, and quietly offstage be working with Turkey to make sure what they're doing aligns with the alliance. Hey, last thought on that. One thing they're doing that is, I think, very dangerous to the alliance is they're blocking the accession of Finland and Sweden, who want to join the alliance. We want them. These are two fabulous turnkey militaries, highly capable. Erdogan's government is blocking their membership thus far. There's immense pressure on Turkey. I think that one will come out fine in the end, but I think it's an example of where we need to be quietly offstage, saying to the Turks, hey, you need to act like allies.
Is there any credence, is there any truth to the claims that Turkey makes in terms of Greece militarizing the islands, under the, I think the agreement that they keep referring to is the Treaty of Lausanne? Now, on the Greek side, obviously, there's a military presence on those islands in response to threats on one side, and Turkey saying the opposite. Yeah. Where does this land?
Yeah, I think the bottom line in this, having studied this exhaustively, as you can imagine, as a NATO commander dealing with two fractious allies here, is that Greece has every right to put up surveillance and be capable of controlling airspace and controlling the seas around what is undoubtedly Greek territory. And Turkey ought to understand that clearly. And frankly, when I spoke to Turkish military officers, they got that. Back to your original very, very good observation that there's a domestic base that's being played to here. Bottom line, I didn't at the time, nor do I now, lie awake at night thinking Turkey is actually going to seize one of those islands. I just don't see it.
Okay.
Sure.
Great. So hypothetically, if there is a war, if something does happen, how do you see it playing out? Can Greece, can they stand on their own 2 feet? Will they need allies to be interjected? How do you see it happening?
Well, first, I want to say again, I don't see any circumstance where Greece and Turkey end up in a shooting war. I just don't see it. Now, having said that, why I think that is because Turkey knows at the end of the day, if it were Turkey attacking Greece, and let's be honest here, Greece is certainly not going to attack Turkey, okay? So there's only one way this starts in your hypothetical, and it would be Turkey attacking Greek territory. If they did that, the rest of the alliance, I am very confident, would stand with Greece. And that's an overwhelming force. Turkey is not going to put itself in that situation. The Turks are smarter than that.
That's encouraging.
Well, and let me say this, because we're all Greeks here, and we all have friends and relatives in Greece, and they take it very seriously, and they do lay awake at night in many sectors of Greek society.
Absolutely.
And I keep, through my media presence, my own personal contacts, my interactions with every level of the Greek government, I attempt to reassure them that the ship of danger has sailed, in the sense that they are part of the alliance. And the alliance is not going to allow Greece to be attacked either by a non-NATO ally or a NATO ally. That's why we have this alliance. And by the way, that's why Sweden and Finland want to join it. And I am confident in Greece's stature and place in the alliance. It would be defended, and defended well, by the alliance.
Another aspect of this discussion is the issue of the arming of Turkey as well. So, in its simplest terms, should the US be arming Turkey in any way in light of the increasing rhetoric against fellow NATO countries? F-35s have been discussed, F-16s and whatnot. That's being blocked by the Senate a number of times in recent days and weeks. Should the US be arming them at this stage?
I think at this stage, the U.S. is playing this one about right, which is to say, let's back up a little bit here. The Turks have purchased the S-400 air defense system from Russia. That's extremely problematic because of a number of technical reasons. It would open up to a Russian-made system, which presumably has some pretty significant cyber backdoors in it, the ability to surveil NATO systems, to interact with NATO air defense, and so on. That was really where this arms discussion started to go off the rails. Prior to that, Turkey was a member in good standing of the alliance, and it was perfectly fine for the United States to train with the Turks, to operate with them. And during my time as Supreme Allied Commander from 2009 to 2013, Turkey answered the bell every time we asked them to forward deploy. Turks went to Afghanistan. They went to the Balkans. They participated in Libya. Many NATO allies chose not to, for example, Germany. And so before we got to the S-400 stage of things, I think it was normal alliance business. After S-400, then I think you start to have a conversation with the Turks, again saying, that's not a good system for you to buy, and it makes it harder for us to provide you the very high end of U.S. military capability. And that's kind of where the problem resides right now. As you say, the Congress is very involved in this, and I think there'll continue to be real slowdowns in the systems that Turkey gets. By the way, Turkey has a pretty capable indigenous arms industry. They build pretty good kit themselves, but your point is well taken. We ought to be looking carefully at the very high end of military equipment under the current circumstances, yes.
So just to elaborate on that, in its simplest terms, the S-400 and something like, or any sort of US made kit, in particular the F-35 and whatnot, is the issue that Turkey could reverse engineer some of this stuff with access to the Russian systems as well? Is that the concern?
No, that would be a good guess, but the actual concern is that if the S-400 system was interlocked with the rest of the NATO air defense system, it would open up all of the NATO defense systems to potentially to Russian surveillance operating through that S-400. Right. And then secondly, closer to the point you're making, any data that was collected by that S-400 system. Let's say we were flying the F-35 on a series of training missions over eastern Turkey. Those S-400 collection capabilities would naturally save that data, and that potentially could be accessed by Russian systems. So there are kind of two distinct concerns there. And again, it's a very technical conversation, and it's conceivable that the West, the rest of the alliance could say to the Turks, okay, let us really get under the hood of these S-400s and look at every single line of code and every mechanical aspect. And perhaps we could get comfortable with it, but boy, it would just be a lot better if the Turks had not chosen to purchase a Russian system.
So they can't really reverse that now, can they?
I don't see how they can at this point. The best they could do is turn them off. They can't return them and get their money back from Russia.
It's not that kind of job.
It's not like buying a pair of shoes that don't fit.
Here's the receipt.
Yeah, there's not a lot of good options in that scenario.
Yeah,
interesting.
Fair enough. Look, I did read somewhere that again we'll go a bit off topic here. You were in the Pentagon when one of the aircraft hit at September 11.
Yeah.
I was blown away by reading that. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And
Sure.
Where were you? What did you hear? What happened straight afterwards?
Sure. I was newly selected one-star admiral. We call it a rear admiral in our system. I think in your system it might be a commodore. But I was very proud of my new rank, and I had a new job, and I was in the side of the Pentagon, which obviously has 5 sides, Pentagon. We all know that because we're Greek.
Absolutely.
The side I was in was the side that was hit by the incoming aircraft. I was on the 4th floor. There are 5 decks, we would say, in the Navy, 5 floors. Mm-hmm. I was on the 4th floor, outer ring of the Pentagon, and actually glimpsed the aircraft, although I didn't know what it was. I mean, I literally saw like a flash and then heard a huge boom, and it struck about 150 feet to my right, so
wow.
50 meters, you would say, to my right, as I was looking out of the Pentagon. And I initially thought that it was like a truck bomb. And I had seen the flash, you hear the expression flash, bang, because light goes faster than sound.
Yep.
I thought it was a big, massive truck bomb. Pretty quickly, we realized what it was. And then there was off to my right, obviously, just an inferno. Black, thick, oily smoke,
Wow.
terrible situation. And in the Navy, and that section of the Pentagon where I was a Navy section. So everybody in the Navy, U.S. Navy, same in your Navy, is a trained firefighter. And we all get extensive firefighting training. We do refresher training every year. And the reason is because if you have a fire on a ship at sea and it gets out of control, it's not like on land with a building, you just walk across the street and let it go out. You got to put it out or you're going to die. So we're all trained firefighters. So we tried to respond, but we had no equipment. We had no capability. We had, extinguishers you can pull off the wall, beaten back by the smoke and the flame, staggered out of the building. That's when the real heroes of the day showed up, the firefighters, the first responders, as we call them. Incredibly, I put that in quotations, but I think around 200 people only were killed. If you had told me before that a fully loaded jumbo jet was going to hit a side of the Pentagon, there's 25,000 people working in the Pentagon, I would have said we would lose 3,000.
Yeah.
That's a tough old building, and its construction saved many of our lives.
Yeah.
So that's the story of 9/11, and I'll close with this: the irony of it all. That's what went through my mind as I walked out. I thought, I've been in the military at that point about 30 plus years. I'd seen my share of combat. I never would have thought the most dangerous moment of my career, the closest I came to being killed in combat, that is combat, would have been in the Pentagon. In the strongest building in the country, guarded by the most powerful military on earth, in the capital of the richest country in the world. Was I safe? No.
Yeah.
And there's a lesson there for all of us in terms of the dangers in this world and how everything can change in a moment.
Unbelievable. And I mean, in terms of the timeline, at the time that aircraft did hit the Pentagon, I can't remember, I'm assuming that the towers had already been hit, and that happened. Were you aware of what was going on outside?
Yeah, but I just, maybe others were smart enough to make that connection immediately and say, oh, it was an airplane, but I wasn't. I just thought it's just a different kind of explosion. In retrospect, of course, it all seems quite obvious, but pretty extraordinary. I'll tell you another small irony in all this. Some years earlier, I had been a Commodore at sea and launched, I think it was 80 Tomahawk missiles at bin Laden. He was at a camp kind of on the Pakistani-Afghan border.
Right.
And we missed him by a matter of minutes. He was probably tipped off by Pakistani intelligence. But I launched those missiles. That would have been probably 98, 99 maybe. And so 2001, he came back and he missed me by a few feet. Yeah, if you stop and think of it that way, to kind of personalize it. In the end, we got him, and he's down at the bottom of the Indian Ocean now, where he will sleep with the fishes, as the Italians say.
God follow the film. So what is the purpose of that, putting him in the ocean? Is that, was there a reason behind that? Yeah, and if you sat and really thought about it, you'd probably agree with this. If you buried him anywhere, it would become a shrine. It would become a place where radicals would, we just thought it was better to just sort of park him way out.
I understand from reading, well, at least, media reports, was that despite everything that had happened, despite the, what he was wanted for and whatnot, all the appropriate rites were actually conducted before he was thrown overboard, effectively. So religious aspect was respected and all of that sort of thing.
Sure, he received, in that sense, what he deserved, and that's why we are the countries, U.S., Australia, that we are. We don't stoop to those levels, and yes, he was accorded the religious procedures of his faith.
I mean, it says a lot about the civilizations in the countries that we live in.
Yeah.
That we would still do that. Unbelievable. I just want to touch on also your the fact that you're quite proud of being sanctioned by the Kremlin.
Indeed, I am.
How did that all come about? And what does it feel like to be sanctioned by another country?
It has come about because really from the time I left my duties in the military, which is 2013, I've been outspoken in my concern about how Putin was continuing to take Russia in a very dangerous direction. And I left, as I said, in 2013, and in 2014 he invaded Ukraine, for the first time, and annexed Crimea and carved out a significant chunk of Ukrainian territory. And that's the first time a sovereign nation has been invaded and had its territory simply annexed, conquered, really since the Second World War in any European context anyway, and I think probably anywhere at that scale. And so I find that just incredibly dangerous to the international system. That's why our nations, yours and mine, fought in World War II in particular to stand up to the Japanese Empire in Asia and to the Nazis and their co-hosts, the fascists in Italy. We stood up to them because we would not allow Hitler and Tojo to simply conquer other countries. We stopped them. And once you crack that door open again, it becomes extremely dangerous. So I've written about this extensively. I'm the Chief International Analyst for NBC News, so I do 3 to 5 national media television appearances weekly, and inevitably I'm asked about the Kremlin and Putin, and I call it very straight, as I always will. He's a danger. He's a serious danger. Right. And for that reason, I was sanctioned, and I'm really glad to be on that list. I mean, it just shows that I'm achieving intellectual penetration in Moscow, and hopefully bringing a few others along with me. And by the way, I won't be able to go to Russia anymore, and that's too bad, because I've been to Russia many times, and this may surprise you, but at the beginning of my time as Supreme Allied Commander of NATO in 2009, 10, we actually were working reasonably well with Russia on things like counter-piracy, on counter-narcotics. They were actually at that time being somewhat helpful in Afghanistan, a country they know well. We had some zones of cooperation, but boy, it has all fallen apart. And I, for one, don't ascribe that to Russia per se. I think this really does land at the feet of Vladimir Putin.
Is part of the concern as well with Russia's demeanor and actions currently that it will encourage other nations? Let's take Turkey as one example, China as another, and obviously China's got the situation in Taiwan as well. Is part of the problem that it's setting a modern day precedent to be able to do this? Exactly.
That's beyond part of the problem. That is the heart of the problem, and and that's why the response in Ukraine is so important. That the West stand with the Ukrainians and show that we collectively will not allow this. And I think as a result of that, for example, jumping to your part of the world, I think all this has a chilling effect on any ambitions that someone like President Xi might have about attacking Taiwan. Look, if you're President Xi, you're watching this debacle unfold. Putin has lost 100,000 killed in action in 11 months.
Yeah.
I mean, stop and think about that for a minute.
Crazy.
In 20 years, in Iraq and Afghanistan combined, the United States had 7,000 killed in action, tragically. But 7,000 in 20 years. Here, Putin has lost 100,000 in 11 months, killed in action. And by the way, his population is less than half ours, well less than half ours. So, point being, if you're Xi and you're watching this, you are saying, I wonder if my generals are as bad as those Russian generals appear to be. And that's a legitimate question. They were all trained in the same old Soviet systems. Number two, you're asking yourself, I wonder if those Taiwanese would fight like hell the way the Ukrainians have. Answer, I don't know, but I've been to Taiwan. I've met Madam Tsai, the president. I've met her national security team. I've seen their armed forces. I don't think they're going gently into that good night. So that's more uncertainty for Xi. And then thirdly, Xi is asking himself, he's looking at the sanctions, which are kind of a slow-moving train, but they're definitely putting sand in the gears for Russia. And Xi is thinking, wonder what that sanctions package would look like. He's saying, my economy it's too big to sanction, right? Yeah,
Definitely.
maybe. Or maybe we'll
concern.
precision guide sanction it, and just like we have with chips, for example. Anyway, I think that's a good thing, and that's why it is important that we in the West stand for things like sovereignty and the right of states not to be invaded by their neighbors. And by the way, it's not just states. Here we get into something very important between the U.S. and Australia, and that is the South China Sea. Here's this vast body of water. It's half the size of the continental United States, so, half the size of Australia. It's huge, in other words. It's full of oil, gas, fisheries, and 40% of the world's shipping passes through it. China claims that as territorial waters. Think about that for a minute. If we were to acquiesce in that, and it's the same principle here, if we were to acquiesce in that, it's just going to open up for an endless number of nations taking chunks of the oceans away. And all of that requires that, I think, we in the West stand with international law and a process of sovereignty, and we back that up with military capability where we have to. Look, it's not Ukraine or the United States attacking Russia. Russia has attacked here. Russia has begun this.
He's the instigator.
He absolutely is. I keep bumping into people, and you probably do too. It's kind of magical thinking that says, oh, if only NATO hadn't expanded at the end of the Cold War, then none of this would have happened. Wrong. If NATO had not allowed Poland and Bulgaria and Romania and Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania, all those nations had spent decades with a Russian boot on their throat, and they begged to come into NATO. We let them in. If we had not done so, Putin would still be running that part of Europe, and that's not in anybody's interest, certainly not those nations.
Very strongly said as well. It's obvious it's something you feel very passionate about.
Yeah, and I think in a sense I've spent a lot of my life living these issues, fighting for them quite literally, and as I think you might have mentioned, when I got out of the military, I became the dean of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, where I have my own PhD. My PhD is in international law with a focus on maritime claims. So when I look at the whole South China Sea situation, I tend to think, boy, we don't want to go down that path and let nations simply claim big chunks of anything, land or sea.
Yeah, fascinating. Look, I just want to get to one of the best titles I've ever heard. Supreme Allied Commander. How cool is that?
It's a great title, and I keep, I had it for 4 years, And I keep asking my wife to call me Supremo at home. And
What
so
did she
far,
say?
she's refusing. So,
Really?
yeah, it's hard to have a title like that because then you don't have it, and you're just an admiral.
Classic.
I liked Stephen Colbert's characterization of that title. That's a fancy pants title to have. It should come with its own hat.
There you go. Well, listen, guys, I want to close by just saying to your listeners, I know they're global, but in particular the Australians, in addition to simply saying thank you for all that we've done together in global security, I just want to say how much I love your country. Because of being in the Navy for many years, I've been to every state and territory in Australia. I know it well. I think as well as an American can. And I like it from its attitude to its charades. Give me a glass of Penfolds. We could go on and on. I know we're supposed to be talking about ouzo, but
Penfolds is a great drop.
It is. It's fantastic.
I just love the spirit of Australia and Australians. I always have, and I think if I can say this, I think the culture of our two countries is why we are great friends and partners. And so thank you for having me on Ouzo Talk with a couple of Aussies, and I'll come see you in person next time I'm down in Oz. Last thing, when I first went to Australia was in 1977. I was a very young ensign. I was 21 years old, just gotten out of the Naval Academy, and we pulled into Sydney, and our sister ship that was hosting us had us out for a barbie, and it was just big grills, sausages, and in a corner were stacked like 20 cases of beer. And there were like 20 of us at the barbecue. So
Wow.
we got a sense
Case
of the
each.
numbers. Yeah.
Welcome to Australia.
It was well done. Thank you guys for
Fantastic.
having me on. What an absolute pleasure.
Admiral, thank you
you,
very
Admiral.
much.
Karistopoli.
Ah,
Nasakala.
thank you, Admiral. Take care.
Take care.
Have a good
Bye.
evening.
Yep, you too.
What'd you think of that, mate?
Mate, that was unbelievable. What a access to someone like that.
We've never really had anyone of that sort of ilk who can speak with such authority on international relations.
Definitely.
It was unbelievable.
And he's a Greek.
And he's great. Yeah, and I mean that's the whole point of this. Ultimately, we're proud of the fact that someone like him, someone like Admiral James Stavridis or Jim Stavridis, is of Greek extraction and holds so much power. I mean, again, he's a correspondent for NBC. He writes for Time magazine. He must be important if he's been sanctioned by the Kremlin as well. Like it's just insane to think that he wields that much power, isn't it?
Definitely. And look, you touch it in the intro. He could have been vice president of the US.
Yeah,
And the
it came close, very
exactly,
close.
Yeah, and they all wanted him in his administration, so he's definitely got some clout, and he's definitely a smart bloke. But we didn't talk about his nickname. How good is his nickname? Zorba.
Zorba.
I can
Very
imagine
good.
him in the captain's chair. Imagine if he's a direct hit or something, jumping into a Zorba. What do you think?
I can see that happening on the bridge.
Classic.
Pamela Kalamatiano.
Yeah, champion. What a top bloke, and giving us time as well out of his busy schedule. He's got
Yeah.
so much on his plate.
And that's the important thing as well. Like usually our episodes go for about an hour and a half, 2 hours or so. For us to be able to get someone like Admiral James Stavridis is no small feat. So to be, to get around 40 minutes of his time, it's incredible that we managed to do that. I'm so glad we did, because
Definitely.
just talking about things like the situation in the Mediterranean, Russia, Ukraine, and finally with China, and there's just so much more that we could talk about.
Yeah, definitely. And look, it was good signs what he said about Greece and Turkey. Because look, Turkey will never invade Greece. I think is what he was saying. Because it won't happen. He can't see it happening. They've got too much to lose. So I guess that's... I think
Encouraging.
It is. And I guess you can start booking for our next trip to Greece now. 'Cause, the elections are on. What did he say? May this
I
year?
think April, May,
2023?
something.
Yeah.
They're coming up. So let's just see what happens.
Yeah, no, it was fascinating chat. So where do we go to from here? How do we better that?
I don't know. Well, having said that, we do have some other fantastic guests on the horizon. Leaders in their field is all I'm going to say. Some very interesting leaders in fields in the areas of science and in business and marketing and communications and whatnot. There's so much coming up on Uzo Talk, so make sure you're subscribed on your favorite platform. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on iHeartRadio. We're everywhere at the moment. So make sure you're liking, subscribing, following, whatever you got to do.
Yep.
Leave us a 5-star review as well. Let us know what you think. Send us an email. Get in contact.
Google us now, because we're everywhere now. If you Google Uzo Talk, we'll pop up. Even YouTube. Get on YouTube. Start following us on there as well. It all means a lot for us.
Absolutely.
And thank you for the people that have written in. Again, we should have had that list.
So just some of the people that have gotten in touch with us: Emmanuel Marinos, Mike Bikopoulos, Angela Yanakos. Guys, thanks so much for emailing us. And on that note, uzotalk@outlook.com is the email. Make sure you follow us on social media as well, at uzotalk or at uzo_talk on Instagram. Nick Athanasiou.
Tom, you're an absolute legend.
Thanks, mate. We'll see you guys next time. Take care.
See everyone.
Ακολουθήστε μας στο Soundees, στο Spotify, στο Apple Podcasts και στο Google Podcasts.